Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Always a pleasure to be back.
So today we're going to be diving into a book that I think a lot of you are probably already familiar with, at least by title. It's one of those books that, it's been around for a while and it's been recommended a ton.
I feel like almost everyone has a copy sitting on their shelf somewhere.
Exactly. Who Moved My Cheese by Dr. Spencer Johnson.
A classic.
And it's not just the book itself. There's a really interesting foreword by Kenneth Blanchard that kind of adds another layer to the whole thing.
Yeah, he actually shares some really personal insights into how the story came about and even the impact it had on him before it was even published.
Exactly.
Which is pretty cool.
So for those who maybe haven't encountered it yet, Who Moved My Cheese is essentially a parable, a short, simple story that uses metaphor to teach a lesson about dealing with change. And it's been incredibly popular.
It's one of those deceptively simple stories that really gets you thinking.
That's it. It's not a long read or anything, but it manages to pack in a lot of wisdom about how we humans react to change, both in our personal lives and our careers.
And how we can approach those changes more effectively.
Exactly. Because change is, it's inevitable, right?
Absolutely. It's a constant whether we like it or not.
So what we're going to do in this deep dive is kind of go beyond just a surface-level summary of the story itself. We want to unpack its central message, explore what makes it so resonant for so many people, and hopefully give you some tangible takeaways you can actually apply in your own life.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So to give you a little context, even before Who Moved My Cheese became this huge bestseller, Kenneth Blanchard was already a fan. He'd actually heard Spencer Johnson tell the story in person, and it really stuck with him. He mentions in the foreword how much it helped him personally, and that's what really piqued his interest in sharing it more widely.
It speaks to the power of storytelling, right? Even in its simplest form, a well-told story can connect with people on a deep level.
Absolutely. And one of the things that makes this story so effective is this central metaphor. It's all about cheese and the maze. Now, cheese represents anything you really want in life. It could be a successful career, a loving relationship, financial security, good health, you name it.
Anything you're striving for, anything you see as essential to your happiness.
Exactly. And the maze is simply where you look for it. It's a metaphor for the often confusing and challenging journey we all take to find what we're looking for in life.
It could be your workplace, your community, your relationships, the world at large, really.
And the whole point of this story is to illustrate how we react when our cheese gets moved, when those things we rely on change, and how we can learn to adapt more effectively.
Because let's face it, our cheese gets moved all the time, whether we're ready for it or not.
All the time. Now, Blanchard shares some pretty incredible anecdotes in the foreword about the impact this story's had on people. He suggests it's literally saved careers, marriages, maybe even lives.
There's this great example he gives about Charlie Jones, the NBC broadcaster.
Yeah, sportscaster.
Right. He was known for covering track and field at the Olympics. And then, out of the blue, NBC decides to switch things up. They tell him, okay, Charlie, now you're covering swimming and diving.
Wow. Talk about a change of pace.
Exactly. And understandably, he was pretty upset. He felt like his expertise was being dismissed, like they didn't value his years of experience in track and field.
It's like they moved his cheese and he's feeling lost and frustrated.
Absolutely. But then someone gave him Who Moved My Cheese, and it completely shifted his perspective.
Really?
Yeah. It made him realize that instead of resisting this change, he could actually embrace it as an opportunity to learn something new, to expand his skill set.
And he did.
He did. He really dove into those new sports, became quite knowledgeable, and ended up having a really successful career. He even ended up in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Wow. So by adapting to that change, he actually ended up achieving even more than he might have if he had just clung to his old role.
It's a powerful testament to the message of the book.
And it's not just individual stories like that. Blanchard was so convinced of the book's power that he actually gave an early version of it to everyone who worked at his company.
Seriously, to everyone.
Over 200 people. He explained that their business was constantly changing, and they needed everyone to be more adaptable, more open to new ways of doing things.
I can see why he felt it was so important.
And you know what? It actually worked. He describes this almost palpable sense of relief that swept through the company after people read it. It gave them a shared language, a way to talk about change in a positive light. And it really helped to reduce a lot of the anxiety and resistance that naturally comes with any kind of organizational change.
That's fascinating. It makes you wonder how many other organizations could benefit from something similar, right?
Absolutely. So the book itself is structured quite intentionally in 3 parts. First, there's a gathering. This is where a group of former classmates at a reunion are kind of catching up, reminiscing, and naturally the topic of change comes up.
It's like setting the stage for the story that's about to unfold.
Exactly. Then comes the core of the book, the story of who moved my cheese. This is the parable itself, the story of the mice and the little people in the maze that we're going to be focusing on.
The heart of the matter.
Right. And finally, there's a discussion where those same classmates reflect on the story's meaning and talk about how they can apply its lessons in their own lives.
That's a nice way to bring it back to the real world.
And Blanchard actually mentions that some people prefer to just read the parable itself and form their own interpretations without reading the other sections, which I thought was interesting.
It speaks to the open-ended nature of the story. It can resonate in different ways for different people.
Totally. So for our deep dive, we're definitely going to unpack that central parable for you. But we'll also touch on some of the key points from the discussion section later on.
Sounds like a plan.
All right, so let's meet the 4 main characters in the maze.
2 mice and 2 little people.
Right. We've got Sniff and Scurry, the mice. They're pretty straightforward, instinct-driven characters.
Their actions are based on their basic needs, like finding food.
Exactly. And then we have Hem and Haw, the little people. Now, they're physically the size of mice, but they think and act much more like humans.
They have all our complex emotions, beliefs, anxieties.
All of it. And every day, these 4 characters would head out into the maze in search of their cheese.
Their metaphorical cheese.
Right. Now, for Sniff and Scurry, this was pretty literal. They were looking for actual cheese, the kind mice love to eat.
The good stuff.
But for Hem and Haw, it was a bit more complicated. For them, cheese, with a capital C, represented something much bigger. It was about their happiness, their sense of fulfillment, their success in life.
It's really important to understand that distinction.
Totally. So think about it this way. For some people, their cheese might be material things, like a big house, a fancy car, a high-paying job.
The trappings of success.
Yeah. For others, it might be about intangible things, like a strong family, a sense of purpose, good health.
Things money can't buy.
Exactly. It's really personal. And for Hem and Haw, their cheese was deeply intertwined with their identity, their sense of self-worth.
They had a huge emotional investment in it.
Huge. So every day, these 4 would get up, put on their little jogging suits, and head out into the maze.
Searching for their metaphorical sustenance.
And the maze itself, it's such a great metaphor for the challenges and uncertainties we all face in life.
Those twists and turns, those dead ends, those unexpected discoveries.
It's a journey, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And as the story goes, all 4 of them eventually stumbled upon this incredible supply of cheese at Cheese Station C.
Like they hit the jackpot.
It was everything they had been searching for, all in one place. And this is where their routines and, more importantly, their mindsets started to diverge.
A turning point.
Sniff and Scurry, even with this abundance of cheese, continued their habit of starting their day early and checking on their supply.
Always prepared.
Right. They didn't become complacent, even with a mountain of cheese in front of them. But Hem and Haw, they really settled in. They started waking up later, moving at a more leisurely pace because they just assumed that cheese would always be there.
They got comfortable.
So comfortable. They even moved closer to Cheese Station C, decorated their little homes with cheesy sayings like, having cheese makes you happy.
They built their whole lives around it.
They did. And they became, well, a little entitled. They started to believe that they deserved this cheese, that they had earned it, and that it would never go away.
A dangerous assumption.
Very dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what sets up the central conflict of the story. One morning, they arrive at Cheese Station C, and it's completely empty.
Gone. Vanished.
Now, Sniff and Scurry, because they had maintained their awareness, they weren't all that surprised. They had noticed the cheese supply dwindling, and they knew that eventually it would run out.
They were ready for it, in a way.
Right. And without any hesitation, they put on their running shoes and set off to find new cheese. No drama, no complaints, just action.
Pure instincts taking over.
But Hem and Haw, they were devastated.
Completely shocked and bewildered?
I mean, their world was turned upside down. They couldn't believe it. Hem was furious. He was yelling, "Who moved my cheese?" as if someone had personally wronged him.
That's become such an iconic phrase.
It has. It perfectly captures that feeling of betrayal, that sense of injustice we feel when something we rely on is suddenly taken away.
And it's interesting how their reactions really highlight the difference between simple instinctual behavior and the more complex emotional responses of humans.
Totally. We overthink things, we get attached, we let our emotions cloud our judgment.
We create these elaborate stories in our heads about why things are happening, who's to blame, and what we deserve.
Exactly. And all that emotional baggage can make it so much harder to adapt when things change.
It can paralyze us.
It can. And that's exactly what happened to Hem and Haw. They were so stuck in their anger and disbelief that they couldn't even begin to think about moving on.
While Sniff and Scurry were already out there exploring new possibilities.
Exactly. And, there's this really telling moment where Haw, in his initial despair, actually writes on the wall, "The more important your cheese is to you, the more you want to hold on to it."
It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is. The more we invest ourselves emotionally in something, the harder it becomes to let go, even when it's gone.
And the more we resist change, the more we suffer.
So true. And as Sniff and Scurry are out there diligently searching for new cheese, Hem and Haw are still back at Cheese Station C, analyzing, debating, blaming.
Stuck in a loop.
Totally stuck. Hem especially, he was convinced they deserved their cheese, that they shouldn't have to go through the trouble of finding more.
Entitlement is a powerful force.
It is. It blinds us to the reality of the situation and keeps us from taking action.
It's like they were living in the past, clinging to a reality that no longer existed.
Absolutely. Meanwhile, Sniff and Scurry, with their simple, straightforward approach, they actually end up finding a whole new supply of cheese at Cheese Station N.
Proving that action, even imperfect action, is often better than inaction.
So true. And as the story progresses, Haw actually starts to have a shift in his thinking. He begins to realize that clinging to the past isn't doing them any good.
He starts to wake up, metaphorically speaking.
He does. He starts to entertain the possibility of new cheese, even feels a flicker of his old sense of adventure reemerging.
The possibility of something new and exciting.
Exactly. And he tries to convince Hem to leave Cheese Station C and join him in the search.
But Hem, he's not ready.
He's dug in. He's afraid of the unknown, convinced that it's dangerous out there.
Fear can be a powerful immobilizer.
It can. And unfortunately, Hem's negativity starts to wear down Haw's resolve. He almost gives up, but then he has this really important realization. He realizes that there's a big difference between activity and productivity. All their frantic searching within the empty Cheese Station C, all their analyzing and debating, it was keeping them busy, but it wasn't actually moving them forward.
It was busy work without any real purpose.
Exactly. And then comes a really pivotal moment. He actually starts laughing at himself.
At the absurdity of it all.
Right. He recognizes how ridiculous they've been, repeating the same actions and expecting a different result. And that laughter seems to be a real turning point for him. It's like he breaks free from the grip of his fear and despair.
It's like a release valve.
It is. And he remembers their old jogging suits and running shoes, the things they had abandoned when they got comfortable at Cheese Station C.
A symbol of their willingness to take action.
And when Hem sees Haw preparing to venture back into the maze, he's totally baffled. He begs Haw to stay, to wait for the old cheese to come back.
But Haw knows that's not going to happen.
He's finally accepted that the old cheese is gone, and the only way forward is to find new cheese.
And that requires action, taking that first step.
And before he leaves, he writes this really poignant message on the wall for him. He writes, "If you do not change, you can become extinct."
A powerful reminder of the consequences of clinging to the past.
It is. And then he heads out into the maze alone.
Brave, but a little scary, I imagine.
He was scared. He was weak from hunger. And the maze seemed even more confusing and daunting than he remembered.
But he kept going.
He did. And along the way, he starts to find little bits of cheese here and there, just enough to keep him going.
Those little wins, those small signs of progress, they can make a huge difference.
They can. They keep us motivated. They build our confidence. And he realizes that even though the journey is challenging, even though he's facing his fears, it's still better than being stuck back at Cheese Station C, hoping for something that's never going to happen.
It's about choosing action over stagnation.
Exactly. And he has another moment of reflection where he realizes that the cheese at Station C hadn't just disappeared overnight. The supply had been dwindling, it wasn't as fresh as it used to be, but they'd been so caught up in their routine, so focused on their comfortable little world, that they hadn't noticed the signs.
They had become complacent.
And he writes this message on the wall: "Smell the cheese often, so you know when it is getting old."
Yeah.
It's a reminder to stay vigilant, to pay attention to the subtle changes happening around us so we're not caught off guard when bigger changes occur.
It's about being proactive, not reactive.
Totally. And he continues his search, facing setbacks, moments of doubt, times when he wants to give up. But he keeps going, driven by that question he asked himself earlier. What would you do if you weren't afraid?
That question can be so powerful.
It can. It helps us to cut through the noise of our fears and anxieties and focus on what truly matters. And as he moves forward, he starts to experience a real shift in his thinking. He realizes that happiness isn't just about having cheese. It's also about not letting fear control his actions, about being willing to embrace new experiences, to step outside of his comfort zone.
It's about the journey itself, not just the destination.
Exactly. And he even starts to find joy in the exploration, in the challenge of the maze itself.
A change in perspective can make all the difference.
And he writes this down. When you move beyond your fear, you feel free. He's discovered that true freedom comes not from clinging to the familiar, but from embracing the unknown.
And he starts using visualization to stay motivated, to keep his spirits up. He imagines himself finding new cheese, enjoying it, and that mental picture gives him the energy to keep going.
And you know what? It works.
He finds it.
He does. After all that searching, he discovers a new cheese station filled with all sorts of new and wonderful cheese he's never seen before. It's better than anything he could have imagined.
Talk about a reward for his perseverance.
I know. And he has a moment of regret where he thinks, why didn't I do this sooner? Why did I waste so much time clinging to the past? And he writes this down. The quicker you let go of old cheese, the sooner you find new cheese. It's such a simple but profound truth.
Letting go can be so difficult, but it's often the key to moving forward.
And he even goes back to Cheese Station C to try and convince Hem to come with him, to show him the new cheese he's found.
What happens?
Well, unfortunately, Hem refuses. He's still stuck in his old ways, still clinging to the hope that the old cheese will somehow magically reappear.
It's sad, but it happens.
It does. But Ha has learned a valuable lesson. He realizes that he can't change other people. He can only change himself.
And that's enough.
It is. He understands that true happiness comes from within, from the choices we make, from our willingness to adapt and grow.
He's found a new level of inner peace and fulfillment.
He has. And eventually he finds his way to Cheese Station N, and guess who's already there?
Sniff and Scurry.
Of course. They had been enjoying the new cheese all along, adapting to the change with ease and simplicity.
They were always one step ahead.
And so Ha joins them, and he reflects on everything he's learned.
What were some of his key takeaways?
Well, he realizes that the old cheese, those things we cling to, they often create an illusion of permanence. We convince ourselves that they'll last forever, but that's rarely the case.
We get attached to comfort and familiarity.
And he learns the importance of being able to laugh at himself, to not take things so seriously, to embrace the absurdity of life sometimes.
A little humor can go a long way.
And he recognizes the wisdom in keeping things simple, like Sniff and Scurry did. They didn't overthink it, they just took action.
Sometimes our complex human brains get in the way.
They do. And he understands the importance of learning from the past, both the good and the bad, and using those experiences to inform our future choices.
To make better decisions moving forward.
Exactly. And perhaps most importantly, he learns the critical importance of staying aware of the small changes happening around us, of being ready to adapt quickly when things shift.
It's about being observant and responsive.
He writes this down. Noticing small changes early helps you adapt to the bigger changes that are to come. It's a reminder to stay engaged, to not let ourselves get too comfortable, to always be open to new possibilities.
And the story ends on a hopeful note.
It does. Ha hears some movement in the maze, and he hopes, just hopes, that it might be him finally letting go of his fear and choosing to move with the cheese and enjoy it.
A beautiful sentiment.
It is. And that brings us to the discussion later section of the book, where those former classmates are reflecting on the story's meaning and how it applies to their own lives.
What are some of the things they talk about?
Well, one of the first things they discuss is how life rarely turns out the way we expect it to.
That's a universal truth for sure.
It is. And they all acknowledge experiencing those moments of resistance, of fear, when faced with unexpected change.
Even those who seem confident and successful.
Exactly. They realize that it's a human thing to want to hold on to the familiar, to avoid the discomfort of the unknown.
It's about our basic need for security.
And they talk about how this story helped them to reframe their thinking about change, to see it as an opportunity rather than a threat.
To embrace the possibilities.
Michael, the one who shared the story in the first place, talks about how it not only helped him personally, but also had a profound impact on his business. It gave his team a shared language, a way to talk about change in a positive light, and it really helped them to adapt more effectively during a challenging time.
So it had real-world applications.
Absolutely. And it's interesting how each of them identifies with different characters in the story.
In different ways.
Yeah. Some see themselves as Hem, resisting change, clinging to the past. Others connect more with Ha, eventually finding the courage to let go and move forward.
It shows that we all have different approaches to change.
We do.
Yeah.
And they talk about the importance of recognizing those tendencies in ourselves, of being honest about our own fears and resistances.
To become more self-aware.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they highlight the power of Ha's question. What would you do if you weren't afraid?
That can be such a transformative question.
It can. It forces us to look beyond our fears and consider what we might be capable of if we weren't holding ourselves back.
It's about unleashing our potential.
And they talk about how change is a constant. It happens to everyone. And the key is to be prepared, to stay flexible, to be willing to adapt.
To embrace the journey.
And they share stories about their own experiences with change, both successful and not so successful.
Learning from both.
Exactly. And they even talk about how they plan to share the Who Moved My Cheese story with their own families and friends, recognizing its potential to help others navigate change more effectively.
To spread the wisdom.
And so the book ends with this really powerful message, which is also our key takeaway for you today.
What's that?
Move with the cheese and enjoy it.
I love that.
It's a reminder to embrace change, to see it as an opportunity for growth, for new experiences, for a more fulfilling life.
To find our new cheese.
And we hope that this deep dive has given you some food for thought, some new insights into how you could approach change more effectively in your own life.
And maybe even inspired you to take action.
Absolutely. So we encourage you to think about which character in the story you might identify with most right now.
Which one resonates with you?
And what old cheese might you be holding on to, perhaps a little too tightly?
What's preventing you from moving forward?
And what small but significant steps can you take today to start moving towards your own new cheese?
Remember, change can be challenging, but it can also be incredibly rewarding.
So embrace the maze, find your new cheese, and enjoy the journey.
That's great advice.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.
Until then,
Bye. Bye, everyone.